I know, but I didn't. Okay, so as I said, the first two of the Haftarot we're going to look at are from Jeremiah, and the rest of them are from various places in the book of Isaiah, which means they're probably not all by the same person, but we'll get into that later.
Okay.
The entire issue of why we have a Haftarah is a good question, and the rabbis hypothesize a lot of different things, some of which have been proven like not so reliable. So the first theory on why we have Haftarot is because in the time of the Maccabees, when reading Torah was prohibited, the rabbis scrounged for a way to remind everybody of the Torah reading, and the readings of the prophets were not forbidden. And so there is the hypothesis that the rabbis of the time chose passages from the prophets that would remind people of the weekly parsha and substituted those for Torah readings. It has been not borne out by any text, or there's nothing that actually says that, but it was a hypothesis. But there's another that actually seems a more logical possibility, which is that the Haftarot were read at various and sundry different times when you didn't have a Torah, your Torah was damaged, wasn't kosher, you couldn't read from it. At times in history where congregations didn't actually have a scroll, a Torah scroll. And so by the 3rd century of the Common Era, there was already a scroll of the Haftarah, of the Haftarot. And those of us at CSAIR know that we used to read from that Haftarah scroll, and it bums me out that we're not reading from it yet. I hope that we will reinstate reading from the scroll, but it's a gorgeous scroll, so I'm hoping that we can read from it.
Is that two arms? 2 arms, or like Esther, 1 arm?
No, 2 arms, like Torah. It looks like Torah. And the one that we have at CSAIR, and because it's Haftarah and it's not Torah, it can have all of the vowels, it can have all of the musical notes, and the one that we have at CSAIR has an ornamental, like a decorative first word or first letter for each Haftarah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's actually a pretty thing, you know. So
like in an illuminated manuscript.
Yes, exactly like an illuminated manuscript. It doesn't have more than that, but it does have that, the first word or the first letter. And so it's pretty to read from. So there was an existing Haftarah scroll, which means that there was a need for it in the 3rd century of the Common Era, and that has nothing to do with the Maccabees and Torah, being prohibited. So there are other reasons for reading the Haftarah. Why do we not use it when we have a perfectly good Haftarah and we have the possibility of reading Haftarah? We don't use it because of the principle of Ma'alin B'Kodesh, right? So Ma'alin means to go up or to ascend B'Kodesh, in holiness, right? It is acceptable to add holiness to some ritual or some event or something. It is not acceptable to diminish, which is why, by the way, Hillel's philosophy on how you light Hanukkah candles was adopted. He said, we ascend in holiness, because Shammai wanted to start with 8 candles and diminish each day. No, Hillel's House of Hillel, Beit Hillel won out on that one because of the principle of Ma'alin B'Kodesh. Okay, so I just wanted to read one alternative explanation about this, which I thought was very interesting, and it comes from Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, which, if you remember the great big black chumashim, black and white covers on the chumashim, which I really loved, Hirsch cited this. He said that the Haftarah reading was instituted to fight the influence of those sects in Judaism that viewed the Hebrew Bible as consisting only of the Torah. So it's a way to reaffirm the merit and the importance of all the other books of the Torah. However, Haftarah was read, but not obligatory and not in all communities and not on every Shabbat. So sometimes, for example, when I'm tutoring a kid who has a difficulty, if I have the possibility, some of you know that I do private B'nai Mitzvah tutoring, and I do private ceremonies. I construct a private ceremony for kids who are having a bar mitzvah. And frequently, I don't teach them the Haftarah at all. We only do Torah. And the reason for that is the Talmud mentions, this is as far back as the year 70, which of course is the destruction of the Second Temple. The Talmud mentions that a Haftarah was read in the presence of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, who lived at the time of the Roman destruction of the Second Temple. And the Christian Bible indicates that readings from the prophets, but not necessarily on a fixed schedule, were a common part of the Shabbat service in the Jerusalem synagogues, even earlier than 70 CE. So that's a lot of stuff about Haftarah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about prophets and prophecy. Because to understand the Haftarot is to understand this whole notion that there are some people who speak on behalf of God, and that those people have status. They have status actually with us, but they did not always have status in their own time. The scholar, late scholar, Alav HaSholom, and may the memory of the tzaddikim be blessed, Rabbi Yochanan Mufs, wrote about the job of the prophet. He says the prophet has 3 jobs, and we're going to see some of this in the first Haftarah that we're going to look at tonight. They have 3 jobs. One is to speak what God tells them to speak. Right? God puts it in your mouth, you say it. This is very interesting because it's exactly what Bilam says to Balak. Bilam says, if I'm, you say I'm a true prophet, I can only say what God puts into my mouth. All right? Which is why I feel like Bilam is a real prophet, a true prophet. The second is to go where God sends you. All right? God says, go to here, go to there. God said to Jonah, go to the great city and tell them, oops, you're going to all get destroyed unless you check it out. Hang on a second, we're letting some more people in. Okay. So that's what happens. You have to say what God tells you. You have to go where God sends you. And the third is an interesting one, and it is to stand in the breach, to stand in between God and the people, to be able to say to God, no, you can't wipe these people out. They're your chosen people, and you have to forgive them. And to say to the people, no, you can't offer to sacrifice to 20 different gods. This is your God, all right? So it's a very difficult position to be standing in the middle between 2 powerful forces. And you have to remember that a prophet, a true prophet, does not get a choice in the matter. A proof prophet, as we're going to see in Jeremiah, is selected. Selected. You don't have a choice in the matter. It isn't even a calling. It's a grabbing. You're grabbed by the scruff of your neck and brought into this. The early development of prophecy was that in the very early days, in the times of the books of Joshua and Judges, there were prophetic guilds. You'd become a professional prophet, and you travel in packs, and you had symbols, and maybe you threw bones, and you had rituals and things. We don't know a lot about those people, but there are sometimes the little drop-ins in the books of Judges, and right up until the book of 1 Samuel, you see Samuel, who's most definitely a prophet, but you see all this other stuff happening about people having prophecy and how Saul speaks in tongues. He speaks in prophetic tongues. So there were guilds of prophets. You see John.
Did do the rabbis acknowledge anyone in the biblical time as prophets?
Well, you have to, Moshe is Navi. I mean, that's what Maimonides calls him, right? Rambam calls Moshe a Navi. There are times when Abraham is a Navi. How do we know this? Because what does he do? He goes where God sends him. He has visions. He says what God tells him to say. So Abraham stands in the breach between, and he stands in the breach between people and God. Moshe does the same thing. You don't want to kill these people, God. It would be messy, and the people would say, and the other nations would say bad things to you. But then God says, you tell the people this. So Moshe and Abraham fulfill that thing. But the first person whose prophecy is a separate thing, even though the early prophets are people like Elijah and Elisha, they don't have separate books of their own. They are prophets because they live in prophetic times, and they say things that come to be, and they speak truth to power. They do all the things that prophets do, but they don't have a separate book. And if you want to read all those wonderful stories about Elijah doing miracles, you're going to have to find them in the books of, they're going to be in Kings, they're going to be in Chronicles, those stories are scattered all over the place, but they're not in a coherent book. And of course, also prophecy at that time kind of got handed down from master to disciple. So Elijah hands things to Elisha and says, good luck, kid, So after that, though, the first prophet who has a book of his own, who's one of what are called the literary prophets, is Amos. Amos and Hosea are the very earliest of the prophets who have like some sort of a coherent book. Okay. There are the three big ones. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are the biggies, not because they're more important than the others, but because
Books.
they have big books. They were the greatest amount of material was recorded, even though, as we're going to see, it's not always clear who was writing what down. Or who said what, and it's hard to figure out how these all got, especially in the case of Isaiah, where all scholars kind of concur that it couldn't possibly have been one person, and that there were at least two and maybe even three of them. All right. So all of this happens over time. But the prophets who are the first is Amos. He was writing about 765 BCE. And the other thing is that I had this picture that the prophets are all in a nice, neat little line. You can line them up, but that's not true. There were some prophets whose lives and whose prophecies overlap. So it's not as all nice and neat as you might think. Amos, then Hosea, who was the last prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. All of the other prophets after him were from the southern kingdom, from Judah. And then Isaiah, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And then the whole of those other little ones like Habakkuk and Micah and all of those guys, they're all scattered all over the place. So there's a timeline that you can make, and you're going to find that they are in different places. Some of them overlap, their lives overlap, but one is a kid while the other one is finishing up his prophecy. So it's a messy timeline. It's not a neat timeline. The other thing to know about these prophets is that some of them were literate and some of them probably not. So we're going to look at Jeremiah tonight. And the thing that we know most about Jeremiah is that his material was written down by Baruch ben Neriah, who was his amanuensis, his secretary, if you wish. And he wrote it all down, not once, but twice, because one was destroyed. Okay? So that's a kind of big overview. Jeremiah, born circa 650 BCE in the town of Anatot, born into a priestly family. His father might have been one of those prophets without a book, you know, one of those kind of general garden variety prophets.
Oh, God.
Did you say, oh God? He died in 570, so that means that he lived to be about 68 years old, I think. And the reason we're not exactly sure is because he's taken off in chains to Egypt. He's dragged off. So there's no way of knowing exactly. At a certain point, his voice just kind of cuts off, and we don't know anything more about him. So I think it's time for us to look at this first Haftarah. So they're interesting things. I'm going to share my screen. And let me see if I can make this bigger so we can read it. I want it to be both in Hebrew and in English so we can see some of the wordplay. Susan, stick with me. There's going to be wordplay. Okay, so here's one of the interesting things to know about this Haftarah. Oh, and one of the other things I want to say about general Haftarot. Lots of times we can say, oh, this is the Torah portion, this is the Haftarah, same theme. Or this is the Torah portion, this Haftarah mentions this event or mentions this person. You can see why they're paired up. But they're not always paired up according to theme or message or any of those things. And these Haftarot, these 10 Haftarot, are a perfect example about why it's not always true that they link up. These do not link up to the Torah Parsha. They are specifically to do the things that they're to do, which is to rebuke and to console. All right, that's what they're there for, to mark this time in the Jewish calendar. That's what they're doing here, okay? So the interesting thing about this one is that it begins at the very beginning of the book of Jeremiah. No other Haftarah starts at the beginning of the book of the prophet. No other Haftarah does this. And what's even more interesting is that the next Haftarah picks up where this one leaves off. So we have two in a row. What? Say again, Naomi?
Isn't there one that's one of the short
Oh, yes,
books?
but that's Micah because he only wrote 11 verses or 12 verses, something like that. Yes, it's the one that we seek out for kids who are having a rough time. You know, you say to a parent, please trust me on this. This is your kid's bar mitzvah date. Yes, because it was such a terribly short book. Okay, so I want to be able to actually read through it without too much commentary so I don't lose anybody. I'm looking at you in the commentary. So why don't we just read for a little bit? Who would like to read? I can't see you raising your hands. You just got to talk. All right, then I'm going to call on people. Vivian? You have to, no, we can't hear you.
Okay,
There we go.
the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin.
Keep going.
The word of God came to him in the days of King Josiah, son of Ammon of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. And throughout the days of King
Jehoiakim,
Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of King Zedekiah, son of Josiah of Judah, when Jerusalem went into exile in the 5th month.
Okay, so now these three sentences tell us who he was, where he was, and how long he prophesied. And that's an incredibly, that's really specific, so that we know that he prophesied from about 740, so for about when he was 20. And then there was a dropout period, and then up until about 686, until his death, all right? So he had 50 years approximately of prophesying, 50-ish, 54 years, something like that. And here's this incredibly compact description of who the guy was, that he was one of the priests. He wasn't the high priest. He was from the priestly caste at Anatot in the territory of Benjamin, which is in Judah, right? That's in the southern territory, in the southern kingdom, right? Remember that we're now at the point where there's a kingdom, a northern and a southern kingdom. And here's where he receives his calling. He receives his calling from God in the days of Josiah ben Ammon. Many of you may know about the reformations that King Josiah, he comes to the throne when he's just a kid. I think he's 7 or something when he's initially crowned. And when he gets to be 13 or 14, he says, wait a second, why is the temple looking schwach? And he institutes reformations that bring the temple back to the center of worship, and that kind of put the people right with God. And that goes until Josiah gets kind of full of himself and he goes off the rails. But what this is telling us is that in the 13th year of his reign, so when Josiah was 20, and who else was 20? Jeremiah was also 20. These guys are contemporaries, okay? And that was the beginning of his prophecy, and it continues throughout the days of the next second king. So Josiah, and then it's Josiah, and then Jehoiakim, and then the next king after that, King Zedekiah, right? So he goes through several kings, and up until the time when Jerusalem goes into exile. But I want you to pay attention to this, something in the second line. Asher haya, all right, I just want to read the Hebrew. Asher haya dvar Adonai elav b'mei Yoshiyahu ben Ammon, blah, 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 blah. What's the interesting word in this? You can read the English and still see it. What's interesting? The word of God came to him, right? He's not writing this. Somebody else has given us all of this biographical information, maybe even after his death. So we know for a fact that these even the first chapters are not specifically attributed to Jeremiah. All right, a lot of this is just kind of background information. Okay, so now he starts to speak, but remember, he's dictating. Okay, who would like to read? Naomi, you were itching.
Sure. The word of God came to me. Before I created you in the womb, I selected you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet concerning the nations.
Okay, so now here's this concept that we have that, before sperm came to egg, you were already a prophet. You were already my man, even before you were, even before in the womb, which is really kind of an amazing concept, which is like the idea that there were certain things that were created before the world. Torah was created, right? The ram for the sacrifice was created. All these things that were before. God is saying to Jeremiah, you have no choice in this matter. You are not whoever you think you are. You're my guy. And not only that, but you're not a prophet just to the Israelite nation. You're a prophet concerning in the Hebrew it says Navi la goyim, which means to the nations. Sometimes I don't always agree with Safaria's translation, even though this is revised JPS. You are a prophet to talk to everybody. Okay, go ahead, Naomi.
There's a big difference between a prophet to the nations and a prophet concerning the nations. There's an enormous difference in meaning there.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, Naomi, keep going. Let's see if we can get through one Haftarot today. That's my goal.
I replied, my sovereign God, I don't know how to speak, for I am still a boy.
Right, so I don't know how to be your prophet, but what's the deal? The deal is that you don't have to figure out how to speak.
And God said to me, do not say I am still a boy, but go wherever I send you and speak whatever I command you.
Okay, there you go. They're the only two things that you, Jeremiah, have to know. You're going to go where you are a prophet because I designate you a prophet. You're going to go where I send you. You're going to speak what I tell you to. Now, here is the kicker, though. Remember I said that the third thing was to stand in the breach.
Have no fear of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares God.
Because Jeremiah is going to be abused, imprisoned, spit upon, threatened with death. I mean, you have no idea how much this guy's going to suffer for the gift of being the chosen person here. You know, like the joke about God, could you choose somebody else? Oh, yeah. Okay, who wants to take over the reading?
I will.
Go ahead, Ruth, go ahead.
God reached out and touched my mouth, and God said to me, herewith I put my words into your mouth. See, I appoint you this day over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant.
Isn't that gorgeous? Okay.
Job.
It's amazing. I mean, listen to it in the Hebrew. He says, I appoint you over al hamamlachot and over all the kingdoms. Listen to the rhythm of this. Lintosh v'lintotz ulaha'avid v'laharos livnot v'linto'ah. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Yeah, so a lot of what happens at the beginning of the book of Jeremiah isn't the gorgeous poetry. That happens in the later chapters, but this happens to be one of my very favorite things. You are going to destroy, to pull up, to dig it all up, and to build and to plant. Jerry, you wanted to read.
The word of God came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? I replied, I see a branch of an almond tree.
Okay, so here's the vision, right? How do prophets know what's going on? They get visions, they have dreams, they hear God in their, like little Samuel who heard God calling to him and didn't know who it was, thought it was Eli, right? In the temple. And we're going to see a play on this word shaked, which means an almond. Makel shaked, a branch of an almond tree. So we're going to see a play on that word. Go ahead, Jerry.
Should I continue?
Sure, why not?
God said to me, you have seen right, for I am watchful to bring my word to pass.
So God is a poet, and he uses that word shoked to mean, which the root of it is to be watchful. Let's just look and see what the commentator has to say about that. Give me a second. I tried to put together sheets about this, but quite frankly, it's impossible. So Rashi says, the almond tree hastens to blossom before all the other trees, and I too am going to hasten to perform my word. And Midrash Agadah says an almond tree takes 21 days from its blooming until it is completely ripe. The number of days between the 17th of Tammuz, which is today, when the city was broken into, when the walls of the city were breached, until the 9th of Av, when the temple was burnt. Ooh, Rashi. Okay? Rashi and Midrash Agadah are pointing to this connection between, which we would never know, because who cares how many days it takes for the almond tree to go from blossom to ripe? I have no idea about that. Those 21 days are the 3 weeks that it takes for us to go from today, this very day, because this morning I read the fast day reading at CSAIR, and so this was Tzom Shiva Asar Tammuz, the 17th day of Tammuz fast, up until 9 something, and in 3 weeks and 21 days, we're going to be at Tisha B'Av. Okay, who wants to take over?
I'll read.
Okay.
And the word of God came to me a second time. What do you see? I replied. I see a steaming pot tipped away from the north.
Okay, now we have to talk about what the politics were of the time, because even though there were Jews in the north and Jews in the south, the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, were fighting against each other. They had separate kings. There was this big battle between these two big kingdoms. They are both going to fall to outside forces, but at this moment, Jeremiah is reflecting the fact that God is showing that trouble is coming from the north. Steaming pot. I'm not sure what other people conjure up when they see this, when they see those words, but I think about those guys storming the walls and somebody brings a pot of molten lead and pours it down. That's the kind of steaming pot I see. And by the way, all through Jeremiah, we're only going to look at 2 Haftarot, but if you get excited and you want to read the book of Jeremiah, you are going to see all these references to metal, to color, to copper, to iron. It's full of metallic references. And so that's why when I see this sir nafuach, this steaming pot, I think of that.
The pot is tipped away from the north, so it's not going to damage the north.
Right, it's coming from the north to the south. Imagine that the north is the castle and they're pouring it down on the south, right? Okay, so here, let's see what God says. Go ahead, Ray.
And God said to me, from the north shall disaster break loose upon all the inhabitants of the land. For I am summoning all the peoples of the kingdoms of the north, declares God. They shall come and shall each set up a throne before the gates of Jerusalem, against its walls round about, and against all the towns of Judah.
All right, so destruction is coming from the north. All the little kings and all of and by this time, by the way, I just want to stop sharing for a second so I can look at y'all. By this time, what's happening in the north is that the northern kingdom has made an alliance. Imagine what nation could the northern kingdom make an alliance with?
The Assyrians.
Nah.
No.
Nah.
Babylonians?
Sort of, yes. But they've really made an alliance with Egypt. Because
But that's in the south.
it may be in the south, but Egypt has made an alliance with Babylonia. So Egypt has joined forces with Babylonia, and it's all going to come down from the north. And remember, when you're thinking about, that can't be because there's Israel in the way. No, not really, because the Phoenicians went up and down the trade routes along the coast,
The Egyptians were seafarers as well.
Exactly. So it means that the Egyptian army and the Babylonian army have joined forces. And really, when you think about it, how insane would it be to decide that you're going to join forces with Egypt? Did we learn nothing? Oh, well. All right. Okay, so let's go back and look at the rest of this because I am determined. Okay, so all these kingdoms are going to come up and they're just going to lay siege to Jerusalem, right? They're all going to set up a throne. They're all going to sit around the gates of Jerusalem, all around its walls. It's going to lay siege to the walls of Jerusalem. Remember that the old Jerusalem was an entirely walled city. It dwelled within these walls. Okay, Ruth, I cut you off. I didn't give you a lot to read. Why don't you try another?
And I will argue my case against them for all their wickedness. They have forsaken me and sacrificed to other gods and worshiped the works of their hands. So you gird up your loins, arise and speak to them all that I command you. Do not break down before them, lest I break you before them.
I mean,
Wow.
this is, God is saying, and it's not going to be easy, and you have to maintain, right? So Jeremiah is going to go from being a member of a priestly class in Anatot, where he could have been expected to have a reasonably comfortable life, with a wife, with kids. No, he's going to be a complete loner who is going to be miserable and friendless and hunted by the authorities. And every time he says, I'm done, God says, not yet, you're not, right? I mean, it's pitiful, actually. It's really seriously pitiful. If I freeze, my computer is telling me my connection is unstable, so please forgive me if I freeze. I will do my best not to freeze. Okay, somebody else? Somebody else want to read? We have 9 people. Somebody's got 11. We have 11 people. I'll read. Oh, go ahead, Jerry. If you want to keep reading, you may.
I make you this day a fortified city and an iron pillar and bronze walls against the whole land, against Judah's kings and officers, against its priests and citizens.
Okay, so now this whole concept of becoming iron and bronze, where do we have the expression in the verse in the Hebrew? It says, "Va'ani," and as for me, "Hinei netaticha hayom le'ir mivtzar," a fortified city, "u'la'amud barzel," a pillar of iron, and the next phrase is the one that I wanted to point out, "U'lchomot nechoshet." Where do we hear the words about absolutely, Jerusalem of gold, right? So these are all the colors, these metallic things are what happens to Jerusalem when the sun hits it. And I am going to make you individual human, I'm going to make you like a fortified city. Okay, against the whole land, against Judah's kings and officers, because here's Jeremiah in Judah. He's going to be prophesizing against the kings. He's going to be saying, look, there's disaster coming from the north, and we here in Judah are not obeying God's commands. We are not doing what we're supposed to do. No, it's really bad. And people are going to say, mind your own business, you busybody, right? And they're going to say it in much more overt terms. Okay, go ahead. Whoever's reading.
They will attack you, but they shall not overcome you, for I am with you, declares God, to save you.
Lahatzilecha. So, all right, so that's what we have. It's not the end of the Haftarah, though, even though I think it would be an excellent end, very hopeful end to the Haftarah, but no, we're going to go into the second chapter. Let's keep going. Somebody else want to take it? Susan Kirshner, I have not heard your voice. Please read.
The word of God came to me saying, go proclaim to Jerusalem, thus said God, I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown. Israel was holy to God, the first fruits of God's harvest. Disaster befell them, declares God.
That's where the Haftarah ends. Go figure. But there's this beautiful, beautiful thing. Chesed ne'urayach, zacharti lach. So if I can get this exactly right, I'm going to share with you a choral setting of zacharti lach. So you have to give me a second because, of course, have to do it exactly right. That ain't that. I don't care. Ugh. Hang on. And that's where I think we're going to end. Well, no, we'll have some time. YouTube. I went to all the trouble of finding this, and then it wouldn't save it for me. So I'm going to have to just hope that it's there. Hold on a sec. No, no, it's not it. Zacharti lach, where's Zacharti lach? Zacharti lach, chesed ne'urayich. Well, now you know what it sounds like. All right, hang on 2 seconds. It's
Does the mom have this also?
Zacharti lach Lewandowski. Okay, so this is Louis Lewandowski.
And it's also part of the liturgy on what, Yom Kippur?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. Zacharti lach. Hang on, I almost. Yeah, there we are.
Is this explicit reference to like a bride?
Yes, exactly.
Before or after the writing of Shir HaShirim?
Oh, long before the Shir HaShirim, I believe. I mean, like, I know I should actually go back on that and make sure that I'm right. Zacharti lach, Zachary, that's why it's not coming up.
Well, if the temple was already built, then it's got to be after Shlomo.
Oh, yes, you're right. It's after Shlomo, but I don't think it's after Shir HaShirim got kind of codified, but I could be wrong. Okay, here it is. Okay, hang on. I have to do this. I have to remember to prepare this. Okay. I'm going to skip through the beginning, which is right there. In a church, by the way. A very churchy church. And I think too slow, but that's my opinion. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just, it's being performed by, I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't tell me. It doesn't tell me. I'm going to try to find a zippier. It doesn't always get conducted. If you sing with Mati Lazar, he conducts it much more that it keeps moving, like it has a pulse to it, it moves. But it's those words of the Haftarah. Okay, so we are 10 minutes away. We have finished the first Haftarah. I, like a lunatic, thought I was going to get 2 in today, but we did a lot of prep work about talking about Haftarah and prophets and everything. So I will double up a couple of the Isaiahs so that we can get through this in 8 weeks. But I wanted to leave 10 minutes for us to talk about this in any way you want to talk about it. So I've talked a lot, and now I just want to like let it all out. Yes, Jerry.
There was a part of that where it said to do this, to do that, to do the other thing, and it reminded me of Kohelet. You know, there's a time
to do this, a time to do that.
and a time-
Yeah. And the first 20 years of your life, boy, did you think you were having a good time. And now it's time to do what I tell you to do, you know, which is really kind of the other thing about this final image. Zacharti la chesed ne'urayach. I am reminded of the kindness of you, Israel, your youth, when you, Israel, followed me into the desert to a place where you had no clue where we were going. And I don't know how many of you know Diane Sharon. She was for many years a professor of Bible at JTS, and she's a good friend. She was one of my teachers, and we hung out, and she's moved to Washington, for which I will not forgive her. But she's with the girls, the twins. So at any rate, the reason this comes up for me is because I took a course with her called Jerry and Zeke. Right? It's a
Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And we did Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And she talked about this image of you coming with me into the desert to a land unsown, to a place where you had no idea. She said, it's James Dean. And the girl gets on the back of the motorcycle. She has no idea where she's going. And I just think that's so lovely. Warren, next time you're going to read an entire Haftarah because you did not read tonight.
Absolutely, and I do have a question.
Did God forget that when we followed God into the desert, all we did was complain for 40 years?
Not all we did, but much of what we did. But still, we went. Warren, you said you have a question?
How does a prophet discern the difference between having a dream and knowing that God is speaking with that prophet?
Well, you see, the good thing for prophets is that Freud hasn't been born yet. So as far as a prophet is concerned, a dream that has meaning or a dream that repeats, who has dreams that repeat? Pharaoh has dreams that repeat, and Joseph translates them. He says, I'll tell you what God tells me to say about this. So dreams are messages from God as far as people of this period are concerned. Visions are messages. You know, you could make a case that all of these people were a little psychotic and they were having a little break, a temporal break. You could make that argument. But the point is that while in that state of having some sort of dream or vision, they produce an incredible body of literature.
Nowadays, we would wonder, is God really talking?
Nowadays, we would medicate those. It's one of the reasons why the age of prophecy has died out. Did anybody watch the very short-lived series I think on Netflix called Messiah?
Yes.
One season, I was desperate for it to come back. It never came back. No. But if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's only one season, and it's about a guy who prophesies to the nation in modern day, in present day, and things happen. He does things that are inexplicable. And it's about the people who believe and the people who don't believe, and it's just an interesting thing. And it raises this whole notion of what do we think about the notion of prophecy or of being seized by God and having God's message, you know? We call most of those people insane.
Yeah.
And some of them are. Somebody like Jim Jones was not exactly your upstanding prophet.
No.
So you know, in the Torah, in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, the Torah tells us that God says to Moshe, and Moshe says to the people, when you come into the land, people will come forward and claim to be prophets. And if what they say comes true, then they are true prophets. And if what they say doesn't come true, they're not. And you shouldn't believe them. And if they tell you to do anything that goes against my previous Torah, right, you have all this Torah. The people who come after can't contradict this. which, by the way, is part of this shalshelet, the chain of transmission, right? The Torah is the body of information that cannot be contradicted. Mishnah comes to explain or to illuminate Torah, but not to contradict it. And Talmud comes to understand Mishnah's explanation of Torah, but not to contradict either of them. And as we go forth from there, if you have a new truth that you want to set forth, it cannot be in contradiction of anything that came before you in the oral chain of transmission or the written chain of transmission. So a prophet that says, like Jesus does, that doesn't matter anymore. Right? That's why Jesus is dangerous. That's why he is crucified, because he's dangerous. He's given people ideas.
You just said something I've never heard in any other class that I've taken about how you can't go against what has been in the Torah.
It's why you have to cite a reference for everything. You have to say, this is what, look, the notion of how do we know that we're supposed to light 2 candles for Shabbat? Where do we get that from? It's never anywhere in the Torah. Oh, but Mishnah and Talmud will come to say, well, yes, it is, because it's implied, Shamor v'Zachor, right? And that's why we have the 2 candles. And so even when we have these rituals, like how do we greet Shabbat, or how do we light Hanukkah candles? There's no Hanukkah until 170 BCE, or up until 68 BCE. There's no such thing. So how do we know what to do? We have things that tell us that this is what this means, or this is how we link one thing to the next. I mean, Mishnah and Talmud come to tell us how to interpret certain mitzvot to make them actionable, I mean, because we're told, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, observe or guard Shabbat, and we're told Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Well, what does that mean? Oh, it means you make a braided challah, and you have 2 candlesticks, and you have wine, and you make a blessing, and here are the words of the blessing. I like none of that is in Torah. But the way that it's justified is that it doesn't contradict something. It brings an actionable meaning to something that exists in Torah. Are we good? Okay, yes. I will now say at the end what I said at the beginning. We're going to start on time so that I don't run over an hour, because that's not fair. This is completely and totally free for everybody who wants to be on it. If you would like to make a contribution, that would be very terrific and welcome. You can make any donation you want to my Zelle account. If you put in my email into Zelle or Venmo, you'll come up with a me that you can donate money to, but it's absolutely not necessary. I'm recording these. I'm going to stop now.